It's the best of the rest. Time to put them to the test. In case your memory is hazy, it's Blaxploitation, baby. This is Black History Month, a 29-day celebration of Black exploitation films.
With most blaxploitation films taking place in the present day, which would be the 70s in this case, a bunch of them tackle racial and political issues. You gotta remember, the early 70s isn't too far removed from the American Civil Rights Act. We're talking less than 10 years in some cases. But where those films focus on something a little more topical for the time, very few films deal with the era immediately following the Civil War and Reconstruction. In that respect, Buck and the Preacher is a rare kind of film. It's a Western, which admittedly isn't rare, but a Western with a majority black cast definitely was for the time. See, most Hollywood Westerns in the past showed kind of a whitewashed retelling of history that either left black people out completely or played them for stereotypes. So when a Western film with a black cast and a black director comes along, it immediately stands out. Buck and the Preacher was directed by and stars Sidney Poitier as Buck, a former soldier who now makes a living as a guide who helps former slaves escape unfair treatment from their former slave masters. Unfair treatment is a bit of an understatement. The bounty hunters who track them down give them only two choices: come back to Louisiana to be a slave again, or die. And not necessarily in that order, because the hunters, led by a man named Deshay, played by Cameron Mitchell, have no issues killing large numbers of the wagon travelers. I hope he doesn't get paid for each one that he brings back alive, because if so, I know who won't be winning Employee of the Month. When you're the type who makes a living helping a bunch of black people, you tend to establish a reputation with the people who really wish you would stop doing that. So when Buck is ambushed at his home, he's forced to go on the run, not only to avoid capture from the bounty hunters, but also to warn another group that he recently helped escape. The movie is an honest and eye-opening portrayal of life for black people following the Civil War, and it's great that it gives a motivation that a black audience can relate to and empathize with, even if none of us lived through it. The movie is not afraid to explore some hard truths from the time period. Like in a scene when Buck asks some natives for help, he stresses the fact that they both have a common enemy, but the native leader is all like, "Hey, wait a minute, I saw you back in the day with that army uniform on, fighting with the white dudes who took our land. We are not the same." Buck is the hero, but it's not all black and white. He's not without sin. Speaking of sin, the preacher in the story is the Reverend Willis Oakes Rutherford, played by Harry Belafonte. Belafonte is quickly becoming the man of 1,000 faces to me, because the man sure loved this heavy makeup. He's once again hardly recognizable as the preacher, with his brown stained teeth and wild hair. This movie was a big departure from the pretty boy looks he was mostly known for, but I'm glad he was willing to take risks for movies like this. He steals the show as the preacher, and there's always a chance that an over-the-top comical performance like this can ruin the tone of the film, or outshine the star. But somehow Belafonte finds the perfect balance. It's up in the air whether he's even really a preacher or not, and the movie holds its cards until the very end in a reveal that's excellent, but also presents more questions than answers. The preacher is clearly a sketchy individual, but at the same time, whenever he needs to, he can rattle off scripture like he's a preacher.
That's right, brother, I'm preaching, and my text is fornication. He that committeth fornication sinneth against his own body. Corinthians 1.
That's you, Esther.
That's you, Esther.
This makes him a very compelling character, and if it wasn't for the fact that Poitier just can't be upstaged, Belafonte might have overshadowed the entire cast. But make no mistake about it, both actors really shine here. You gotta remember, these were easily the two biggest black actors of the 50s through the 70s. Buck and the Preacher would be like if Denzel Washington and somebody like Morgan Freeman teamed up for a movie. They don't do it alone though. Ruby Dee is here as Buck's wife Ruth, and as usual, she's great, even though with the way the plot is written, she kind of disappears for long stretches. Buck and the Preacher was originally directed by a white director, Joseph Sargent, but it became immediately clear that he didn't understand the assignment and tried to direct the movie more like a traditional Western instead of what Poitier wanted. So he was fired and replaced by Poitier. A white director being fired in favor of a black one was unheard of in this day and age, especially with it being Poitier's first effort at directing. But in the end, it feels like it ended up being the best thing to happen to the film and gave Poitier the comfortableness to direct future films that we've come to love. Without him and Belafonte, I don't think Buck and the Preacher would have been nearly as authentic as it turned out. Well, almost completely authentic. The natives are played by white and Hispanic people, but one of them was Belafonte's wife, so what are you gonna do? Even if you aren't into westerns, just like me, I promise that Bucking the Preacher is still worth your time.